Hi, and welcome everyone to a new episode of Post PhD Directions. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our guest, Kirsten Thornhill. Kirsten got her PhD in health science and made her transition from academia into industry, where she now works as a regulatory research scientist at Intermountain Health. What I think makes Kirsten's story so inspiring is how quickly and effectively she navigated the transition. Shortly after graduation, Kirsten actually secured a job that I would say aligned with most of her non-negotiables, and we will talk about this later a little bit. I really wanted to bring her on the show and dive into her journey to share her strategies, to show how she approached the transition herself, and hope that we can showcase the things that made the biggest difference for her. So you could potentially take out whatever you think could work for you too. At the end, maybe can help you to feel empowered about the transition, but also use tricks and tools from someone who has made it very effectively and successful. So whether you're in the middle of your PhD or you're exploring career options, post-graduation, or even consider a big move out of academia, this conversation is full of insights to guide you and motivate you. And with this, Kirsten, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, Kirsten, it's really exciting to have you here because I talk to a lot of PhDs, and for most PhDs, the transition is often not as smooth as I felt like yours was. When I saw you posting about your transition, it was so inspiring to me to see how one can make the transition successfully in a very effective way when you prepare in the right way, meaning, have the right tools and knowledge, but also maybe the right mindset about the transition. And just to set the stage before we start, could you tell us a little bit just about, your background, your PhD journey, and what really motivated you at the end to make that transition into the new role outside of academia?
Absolutely. I am a first generation college student, so I never knew I would be right here ever. And I think my love for research kind of blossomed in my undergraduate years and just went into a master's and then naturally went into the PhD. And the PhD process was a very non-conventional one for me. I didn't necessarily work with just one PI. I was frequently working inpatient, outpatient with clinicians through research and clinical practice. So I was often working with folks that I didn't know what their patient variables were, and I had to jump on that, or I had to work with academics and go over statistics. And so I really had to wear a lot of hats during my PhD, which required me to have, one, a lot of humility, and two, how far can I stretch and expand my ability and want to learn? And those were constantly challenged through that process. So wanting to kind of wing or span out of academia was a hard decision for me because I've taught in academia for about 5 years as an adjunct, and I've really enjoyed the process of giving back to pre-med students, biology majors, individuals wanting to go into medicine. But if research has taught me anything, it's been I love a challenge. I love to always have a reiterative process of failing, of relearning, of trying something new. And finishing school, I really wanted to go into a position where I could hone in my skills for what I've developed, but also how can I continue to challenge myself and learn? Because if being a forever student, finishing a PhD has taught me is how much are you willing to grow and learn, even once you're done, even once you have those letters by your name in that next position, is it challenging you? Is it going to help you grow?
I love this perspective of keep growing and keep learning is one of the things I loved about doing a PhD because you're constantly challenged. It's never boring. And I love this feeling of no day is like another.
Yeah.
You never know what you're gonna do, what to expect. Things might go wrong. But when things go wrong, I think it's so important because sometimes we always want to succeed. But I think the biggest learnings really come from failures. I love the whole mindset that you have around your own PhD, but also about your next position. And I think it already says a lot about your own values, right? And what you need in order to flourish and to be fulfilled in what you do. So When you thought about leaving academia, what was your thought process on how to approach this transition? It seems like you're quite reflected in terms of what you want and what you don't want. Could you elaborate a little bit when you realized, okay, I want to go into industry? Did you have some sort of protocol on how to approach the transition?
I would say I first was very internally reflective before I really communicated to mentors or the PIs I worked with that, hey, I think I actually want to go to industry. It was very much a continuous, scary conversation with myself. Okay, I'm surrounded with academics that are doing academic research, but I'm also working with clinicians that are outside that, we're either consulting with or sponsors. And I was teaching through the entire process while I was doing my PhD. And as I mentioned, I loved that giving back to future generations. But I personally felt that I reached a point in my adjunct position where I had reached my full capabilities with teaching and with how I was reframing my coursework every semester. And for me, that didn't necessarily look like I feel this huge confidence. It looked like, okay, I don't know how else to refine my material. I don't know how else I could better craft this. I've created these scripts. I've brought these real life examples to students. How can I keep pushing myself in an area where I've taught this class 47 times? And so then I started to think maybe after school, I don't go in this route. Maybe I go somewhere where I only know 2% of what I need to do. And that 98% will excite me so much that my growth potential will just keep going. And so once I kind of started to think about, okay, I think I'm going to go to industry. I don't even know what that looks like. What does the word industry mean? Is that just non-academic? Is that more technical? Is that me going out of kind of a health and medical background? So that was the scary part. And then I reached to the point, right, where I could communicate to colleagues, professional friends, I'm going to go to industry. And of course, the first reaction was surprise from pretty much everyone I told, because my background has been to work in a research lab and do academic research and teach. And people were kind of caught off guard, right? Because this trajectory I was building for myself looks like it should be perfectly set up for this. And I wouldn't say I always catch people off their toes, but I'm always looking at, okay, how can I set myself up to have more opportunity to grow? And I thought, okay, I'm going to navigate industry and I have no idea how, and I have no idea who to ask. And I just know I need to do this. And so I kind of started from that internal dialogue and then started to have those uncomfortable conversations with people of my academic friends or colleagues. Hey, do you have any connections to individuals in medical sales or med tech or biomedical research? And so I kind of started to network that way to just start to kind of build a bridge or attempt to build a bridge, because a lot of my academic connections were like, I've only ever worked in academia. I don't know if I can provide you that guidance or those recommendations. So let me expand to my network. So those are really my initial steps.
So many things that I actually want to touch upon, but also it's so cool when you said, I wanted to challenge myself and go out into a field where maybe no 2%, but I have so much more to learn. It always makes me think about, when we started a PhD, wasn't that a very similar situation? And this is really what I like to remind PhDs about when they're so afraid of the transition, and when they're so afraid sometimes. To be fair, not everyone approaches it from the same perspective as you do. I love your perspective of challenging yourself and putting yourself in a situation where you can grow, where you can learn. I think a lot of PhDs, they're afraid and they focus on the things they don't know, and they're afraid that they cannot perform in that role. Whereas you really approach it from a perspective of where we were in the beginning of a PhD. I know very little, and there is so much to learn, and I'm really excited. And I think just the same excitement as we brought to when we started our PhD, I think that's the right excitement that you brought into, oh, I'm going to work in a new role and I can learn and grow, and see it as an opportunity rather than, oh, I don't know this, I don't know that. And the trust that you can actually learn and acquire these skills along the way. So I think that's pretty cool. And I just want to emphasize, because this is what I really try to often tell PhDs. Remember where you came from. Remember the day when you started your PhD. How much did you know and how much did you learn throughout that journey?
Yeah, I really, it was an evolving process because, whether you're applying to 10 jobs or 200 jobs, whether we're looking at the 2024 market or what's to come. It was challenging. And it was definitely, I had to look at it from a refine and redo process because, of course, at first I was kind of that eager, just finished school. I'm so excited. I did it. Now I can do whatever I want. I can get the job. And the job hunting process in general was very humbling. And two, I really had to look at how am I communicating my skills? Do I know how to communicate this? I've been conditioned to an academic framing of words, of jargon, how to do resumes. I don't know if I have the resources to be able to get out of that mindset because I'm too close to me. I am with me, right? I went through this entire process with me. So reaching out to the network and really just being like, okay, I don't know this. I need to find people that do, even this is uncomfortable and I'm needing help with a resume or a CV. Like, I'm going to need kind of like a village approach to be able to navigate and speak for myself in a way that maybe isn't as self-limiting or that is more action-oriented or impact-oriented versus, I wrote X amount of papers, I contributed to X amount of things. So kind of breaking that conditioning was very challenging.
I think you just said something very important, and it's really about be proactive. It's a process, but you actually have to be the driving force behind finding that fulfilling career and understanding where do I fit, where do my skills fit, and how do I communicate them. And this is, I think, so important and cannot be overemphasized to understand. Be in the driver's seat of your career and plan it and go out, talk to people, get the information. At the end, when we're done with a PhD, I really think the world is so big and there are so many different roles. How would you know where you fit? And it's so important, as you said. It takes a village, and that's what it does. And I think you have the way you describe it. I can really come to understand that you really utilized your network. You just reached out. You asked people. It was uncomfortable. Yes, it is. But nothing is easy. Everything that somehow comes with a big reward is somewhat uncomfortable. And just going out, talking and starting utilizing whoever is there. And as you said, maybe these people don't know exactly, but they say, oh, but maybe I know this person. It's all about going out and starting the process at some point. And I think it's sometimes would be surprised that help comes from very different directions where you would have never assumed it. And really just like tapping into your network and using your network and starting networking. I think often a lot of PhDs completely underutilize that part of the job search, or like they underestimate maybe the power of their network or the power of networking in general. Many just think of it's uncomfortable, but I think it's really, really, network can be really, really helpful in that process. When you reached out to your network, what do you think were the biggest learnings? Did you do some informational interviews, or how did you find out? Because I can imagine, when you finish your PhD, like many of us, they don't really know what can I do. There's so many different positions out there, so many roles. I have no idea what they mean. So how did you approach that part of the job search that you could really say, okay, this is the role where I would see myself working in?
It was definitely a roller coaster process through trial and error. And I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to throw spaghetti on the wall and I'm going to see where it falls and then pick up those pieces and do it again and again and again. And some of those were sending, cold call emails, cold call messages on LinkedIn, and not even specifically saying, hey, I'm interested in this job that was posted at your company. Let's chat. Some of my messages were, hey, I'm really interested to hear more about your career path. I'm really interested to hear about your connection and passion towards X company. Can we meet over Zoom for 5 minutes? Can we have a Zoom coffee? I'd love to hear the 3 most valuable things that brought you into where you're at in your career. And so I really tried to come at it from an unconventional standpoint, or maybe trying to be quote unquote original, because I wanted to come across as build a relationship. This person's most likely not going to answer, but what if I'm just asking to get to know them a little bit better at a personal level, and then their professional background can come into conversation? And, did that work most of the time? No. But did it work a handful of times? Yes. I was able to hop on a call and somebody connected me to somebody who was a manager for medical device sales that I hopped on the call with. And through that kind of like informal interview for that specific instance, I quickly learned what skills that they wanted me to show up with and if I truly wanted to do that or not. And so I was able to think about relocating, how I would be talking to physicians, which would be very different than my background. And was that a challenge I wanted to put myself into? And so some of those, I would say I had kind of informational interviews that were informal or, hey, I can hop on a call for 10 minutes tomorrow. So-and-so gave me your phone number. And I'd be like, okay. And every time I had some type of conversation, Zoom, I would just jot down in my journal what I liked about what they said, certain words that they said that they kept repeating. And maybe that's an industry term of saying interdisciplinary. And instead, I should say cross-functional. So I really just kind of had this journal to talk back and forth with myself of, okay, I really liked this part of that job. I really liked this. I wasn't really a fan, and I don't think that's necessarily a skill I really enjoy that I want to keep developing. So maybe not that job. And that's what kind of started to lead me to how specific can I get with job titles? And if I think a certain job title is what I want, is that because my maybe ego side is saying, Kirsten, you have a PhD. This is the job title you want. Or is it, Kirsten, you have a PhD. Now that's in your tool belt. What kind of job do you want? Like there is just very different perspectives in my head that of course we're battling through this job hunting process. And I really looked at my key skills, wrote this down, worked with Almami and looked at what do I want to do? What skills can I keep growing in? And how do I want to connect with people through research? Those were like my main things. And that kind of what led me to like my creating my non-negotiable list, which helped with the job hunting process because I got even more specific with what jobs I was applying to. And I was a lot more intentional with those applications.
Thank you for sharing, Kirsten. That was very insightful, and it really reminded me a lot about my own approach that I took at the time when I was like, I think it was midway PhD, and I was like, what's next? I don't want to stay. What can I do? And it's overwhelming when you realize you can do so many different things, right? And I, at the time, joined an organization called PhD Careers Beyond Academia, and we organized sessions for other PhD students, postdocs, and we brought in PhDs who have made the transition successfully, and they talked about the role they're working in, what it actually means on a day-to-day basis. So they describe the tasks that they're doing and the skills they need. And for me, it was really like you just described, it was like, oh, I like that, but I don't like that. And it was really like the more I listened to different people, I could kind of get this list in my head where I knew this is something I like, this is something I don't like, and kind of refine the jobs that would basically fit me based on that list. And I think it's a really excellent approach to do informational interviews, which I think I always say is one of the coolest tools ever, because first of all, you do not only get information about a job and also insider info, and you hear the lingo they're using, so you can actually start, understanding, oh, this is how they talk, just like you described. You also build a network at the same time. So it's a really like, I think it's a tool. It's like where you get two birds with one stone. It's just fantastic. Just go out. And I know it's uncomfortable. And I like that you said that many people didn't reply. And I think that will be the reality. But at the end of the day, I think it's a numbers game. If you reach out to enough people, if you come across as a nice human being, you might have a chance that some reply, and they will teach you something. So I would just encourage everyone who listens to use informational interviews, leverage it. Is really valuable, actually.
Not to interrupt you, that brought kind of a light bulb. Another thing I can add is, right, you're crafting your resume, you're looking back on what did I do for 4 years? I know I was a workhorse, but what did I do, right? What was my impact? If I wasn't present on these studies, these collaborations, what wouldn't have gotten done? That's just another way of looking at it. And once I was finishing school, I actually reached out to every company that I worked with, whether it was statistical software, whether it was medical device equipment, whether it was the tech support that I was constantly on the phone with because we were validating new ultrasound devices. I reached out and said, hey, I'm finishing my PhD in health sciences. I've really enjoyed working with your product. I've really enjoyed working with the statistical softwares that you guys are developing and beta testing. I'm not sure if you have a position open, but I would love to chat more about a potential opportunity to continue to help improve the efficiency and productivity of your device or whatever it was. And most of those, I got replies. Even if there wasn't a job opening, they were like, wow, I really love to hear that you provided feedback about our device or our software, or whatever it was that I used during my research studies. If something comes up, I'd love to keep your information. And so that may be something that once I reached out to one, because I really liked using their statistical software, I was like, why don't I do this to all of the devices I worked with, to all of the clinicians that I worked with outside of the university, and just let them know, hey, I'm finishing up. We've already built this rapport. So I encourage current or soon to be done PhD students to reach out to those companies you are using their research or validating their equipment or validating their programs, because you have that insight knowledge of working through it, performing a study or numerous studies, and maybe you're what they're looking for. Maybe they don't know it yet, or maybe they're going to open a position soon and you already have a rapport with them.
I think it's so important what you said, because sometimes we think, oh, we don't have a network, I don't know anyone. But actually, when you start thinking, oh, I've worked with clinicians, I've worked with, other companies, and as you said, maybe I validated some of their products, and just be like, hey, have a nice chat. And as you said, you already have that rapport. So this is already, you have a pre-existing relationship. So it makes it much, much easier to get these people maybe on a call. And also they have worked with you, maybe in, various settings, sometimes a bit closer, maybe sometimes not that close, but they kind of already got to see who you are as a person. And I think that can actually be really, really helpful. So thanks for sharing. Kirsten, if you think about, so it seems like you leveraged networking. It was quite a big part of your job search. What other tools or resources do you think were really helpful for you in your transition into that new role?
One, I would say, is peer review. So have people review your resume that don't know your background, that don't work in your field, that aren't your current colleagues. And for that, it looked like reaching out to some of my friends in my friend group, I live in Utah, and a lot of the environment here is just very outdoor activity oriented. So a lot of times you don't know what your friends do, but it's not very professional. Conversation is more like not part of the culture here. It's more, what activities do you do? Nonetheless, I did reach out to some friends that I was like, hey, what field do you work in? And some of them said aerospace, engineering. I'm a chemist, and I said, would you mind looking at my resume? I know you don't know anything about me professionally, but if you were to read this, could you see what I've done in the last 4 years? Could you see what impact I had at this university or this clinic? And that was super, super helpful, because they were like, I don't know what a cannabinoid is. And you wrote this paper and talked about this a lot. And I was like, okay, well then maybe, yeah, if I'm applying to an industry where somebody doesn't know what that is, or looking at brachial artery flow media dilation for vascular health. My brain knows that because I did that for 4 years, but how do I communicate? I used ultrasound devices. So the peer review process from people that had no idea what I did was very, very helpful. Secondly, I came across Alma Me from a LinkedIn post, which LinkedIn's really like the only social media I use. And I thought, okay, I love these posts. These are speaking directly to me. And this was before I finished school. Continued to follow. And then I reached out to Angela and was like, can we just get a virtual coffee? I want to know more about what you're doing and just hear more. And so I learned more about Alma Me, and then I looked at the different packages that you guys had available at the time and thought about it for 24 hours, maybe longer, because I think that's just our PhD brains to have time to process. And I thought, maybe this feels uncomfortable because I need this. And this is going to be an additional perspective that doesn't know me. And this is an investment in myself. Like, this financial payment for this program is an investment in myself. Just like I invested in 4 years of school, I invested in that certificate program, I invested in learning this software. And that's kind of how I approached it. So once I got to work with Alma Me, that was really when it reminded me of the feedback process when you're writing your dissertation and your committee members give you feedback and they tear you apart in the best way possible. And it was like that for the resume process. And it was very humbling, because I thought, wow, I've done all this work. I'm very confident with my resume, and having that peer review from strangers was like, okay, I'm putting my PhD student hat back on. I'm getting feedback. How do I interpret this feedback, and how am I going to make it better? Because they're giving me this feedback, even if it's harsh or hard, or I don't understand what their comments meant, this is going to make me better. And so that process helped light years.
I told you I shouldn't say I love it all the time, but what I do love is this, the thing you did with your friends, Kirsten, is so cool, because what it really means is you have someone who has no idea what you did, and you want them to understand and be able to create a picture of who you are, Kirsten, professionally. And this is exactly what you want to do when you end up on a recruiter's desk, right? You want people to read this and kind of give them an opportunity to kind of imagine who this person is, and also make them curious at the same time, right? I want to have a chat with her. I want to know more. And it's really cool, because most of the recruiters, first of all, they don't speak our language. So they don't really understand all of this sciencey stuff that we usually use. So it really helps you to understand, okay, am I using the right language? Do people actually understand? Or is it, because as you said, when you're in your own subject matter, everything is so clear to you, but really getting a different perspective from someone who has no idea what Kirsten actually does is so, so valuable, because all of a sudden you realize, I thought this should be clear to everyone, but clearly it isn't. And I think this is really cool. I've never heard about this in this context, because, a lot of people, they go out and they ask, can you have a look at my resume? And then they tell them, okay, yeah, it's nice. But to ask them to give feedback on whether they can paint a picture of you, and whether they understood what you did and what you can potentially bring to a company, I think that's actually a really cool or a really cool way of approaching it, because you get a good understanding of where you have to improve your resume so that anyone can understand. And it's really like, imagine there's a recruiter who's 24 years old, has no experience whatsoever, no technical background in the field where you come from. I love that. And I also love that you mentioned Almami is a non-paid advertisement. I didn't pay you to say that. So I'm very happy that you felt like that this actually also added something and made your resume a little bit better. So it makes my heart always very happy when I read your post about it, because it's really like, seeing the real impact you can make is really what I love about this business. When you think about, why did I start this business? Why did I do a PhD? I think it was always a value to make an impact in the world. And that's just one way of making an impact that you see often at a day-to-day basis, which is amazing. And sometimes it takes weeks. In science, it takes years. So now we talked about networking. We talked a little bit about other tools. I'm just thinking we could talk about the ego. Like I will, because this is something that you said you think is really important to emphasize, to understand, where you come from. I think you mentioned it quickly that you really, have to go back, but I don't know if you would like to dig a little bit deeper into this.
We dedicate our entire life to this PhD, or it feels like, however involved you are or aren't. There's so many times you want to give up and you keep going, and who you surround yourself with this time matters. And maybe you don't get a choice, right? Maybe you're in the lab and you're working with an certain PI and you got to get it done. And you've surrounded yourself in this, we could call it maybe a small pond of these specific people for this long amount of time, honestly, in your academic career. And then now you're free, you're out, whatever that means. And kind of looking at it like, now I'm a small fish in a really big pond. Took some harsh, quick no rejections right away to jobs I was first applying to, and was thinking, well, they required a PhD. Like, why was I an instant no? I have one. And then I really had to think, okay, I'm now a small fish with other PhD fish in a big pond. Maybe it's not just it. Maybe the PhD isn't where my road ends and everything's set up for me now. And so I really had to work on, quote unquote, like quieting the ego and challenging the ego, because yes, I was able to accomplish so much, and I'm focusing on writing this resume every day where I'm talking about my highlights and I'm talking about my impact. But getting myself out of that was where the magic really happened. And what I mean by that is I would take 48 hours and not apply for jobs. And then I'd go back and look at my resume and be like, I misspelled that. Or what did I mean by this sentence when I was editing it at 11 p.m. 2 days ago? And taking that time to pause and read it again with fresh eyes, just like you would for dissertation edits or something. And to go into the process with your PhD hat on. and being able to, like I said, kind of start from the bottom, which when I first was told through a professional friend, you kind of have to start at the bottom of the totem pole again now that you're starting your career. And when I first heard that, my innate reaction was, what do you mean? I did all of this work and you just told me I have to start over? And there was a lot of ego with that, as in like, I climbed this mountain and you're telling me I have to go down and climb another mountain? And so I sat with that for a couple of days and thought, okay, maybe there's some merit to what they were saying, even if it hurt my ego that I didn't realize I had. Okay. And so that's when I started crafting a list of what am I good at, quote unquote. And what that first looked like was me reaching out to my dissertation committee and saying, what 3 things do you think I'm highly skilled at? And that was very uncomfortable in and of itself, because these people have got to know me very well over the last 3 or 4 years. And we've developed a very honest relationship where if I'm asking them a question, I know they're going to respond. And I also said, what are my 3 weakest skills, or where do I need room for improvement? So I added those to my list to say, okay, these are what I'm good at by unbiased people that have professionally worked with me. This is what I need work on. Do I want to work on these things? Do I need to work on them? Are these skills that if I want to go and be a research scientist or go into clinical research or some type of a medical device, whatever it may be, do I need those skills? And so I really tried to look at it like that. And then that led me to better crafting the list and saying, okay, these are the skills I'm really good at. These are the things I love and I could do every day. It may not look the same, but I could do these every day. And then I started to more purposefully apply to jobs that met the skills. And the job title kind of came second to a second thought. And that really helped the ego kind of go away, because then once I started getting emails to set up an interview or a phone interview or a Zoom interview, I was like, okay, I'm showing up as the characteristics and skills that I'm showing them. And I can sprinkle in these formalities in my background in these interviews. But how I communicate now that I've got my foot in the door is going to be everything. What story am I going to tell them? Because I think as PhDs, we naturally will go down rabbit holes, right? Or like get really passionate to talk about our research, or the infamous question in an interview is, can you tell me a little about yourself? I would say that's the most intimidating question ever, because from my perspective, they're really just trying to see, 1, how do you present yourself? 2, how do you talk about yourself? And 3, how much do you actually care about our company or this position? And that's happening within a minute, 2 minutes of an elevator speech. And so a couple of the interviews, I would get off the interview and, of course, psychoanalyze what I said or what I didn't say. And I really started to work on answering that question off script. I worked on rewriting scripts of how I could answer that question with that sounding less academic, with it sounding more like, this is who I am as a person. This is what I want to do. This is the value I can provide to your company. And so those are just some examples of like the reiterative process where I had to be like, hey, these people don't know about my ego. They don't need to hear it. I can't have it anymore. I have closed that chapter. I'm still so proud. I finished that degree and no one can ever take that from me. And I can keep that relationship of maybe some ego to myself. And now I just get to show the world how I get to contribute to them or their mission or help them, or what can I, add to the value of what they're doing.
I really like, Kirsten, how you said, when you finish a PhD and you think you're at the top of the mountain and then you realize you're still at the bottom somewhere. I think it's such a nice picture, because it's just the start of a career, right? It's not like, even though it seems like we're at the top of the mountain, which we are, of a bigger hill or of a bigger mountain, we probably kind of managed to climb maybe a 4th or a 5th, but it's really just the start to the top of the big mountain. And I think it's so important. Sometimes we feel like, we go out, we have a PhD and everybody needs to see our value. They don't, especially if you're not able to communicate what you can bring to the table. If you cannot show how your skills apply in an industry setting or in my company, you're not gonna get hired. So there is one more thing that I would like to, just so for everyone to understand a little bit, because you also said you like to challenge yourself. So I would assume that you probably didn't match 100% of the skills that were on the description. How did you handle this? This is a question we get a lot. Oh, but how can I demonstrate that I can work in that role when I don't have the skills? So did you come across where you actually had to somehow talk about the things that you're actually lacking and how you can demonstrate how you would be able to get where they need you to be in terms of skills?
Yes, my current position. So I've seen things on LinkedIn and had a lot of individuals ask me about, how do I change what I'm saying on a resume without lying, right? To meet a job description. And what does that look like? And I usually give the analogy, because I talk in analogies, of the glass, right? Is it half full, is it half empty? Is there water in the glass? And so let's say, the skills are X, Y, and Z in a job description, and you have a handful of those. And maybe one of those skills is a synonymous term in your perception that you have. How are you going to communicate some examples, since we love to thrive off of logic, right? Statistics, that you were able to problem solve and critically think, but the description says critically think. How can you give an impact that you provided that skill in a study? And so trying to have that glass of water in front of you and always look at how you can craft truth from your story and your experiences to display what they're looking for. And I think maybe just some good advice I got in the past was to apply for jobs that you're 50% qualified for. Apply for jobs that you're 80%. Apply for jobs that are 100. You don't know. You don't know who's behind that screen. You don't know who's looking. And for instance, this position that I'm in now, I don't have regulatory background. I have an outpatient, inpatient, clinical, sports medicine, physical therapy, cardiology background. And going into this interview, why are you so interested in this position, and what top skills can you bring to this team? And so I definitely talked about grant writing, creating standard operating procedures, developing and establishing protocols for the lab in and out of types of clinics that I hadn't worked with those types of positions before. And I also kind of finished that spiel by saying I'm so excited to learn more about FDA regulation and how I can apply that in a clinical setting, because my background with establishing order and leadership within a clinical research realm will only heighten and complement what you're looking for. And so I kind of just tried to tie it all together by saying, this is what I can provide for you. This is what I don't know, but I'm so excited for you guys to show me more and put our skills together. And I was just very transparent, because the population that I work with now is women and newborn. So mainly neonatal studies and NICU moms and babies. And I said, I haven't worked with this population before. I've worked with cardiology patients, physical therapy patients, but I love the opportunity to work with another vulnerable population, because that means I'll get to learn more and bring in a fresh set of eyes to help you with the regulatory documents and communications with FDA while I get to learn and develop in this position. And I either thought they're going to say, nope, she doesn't have a background in this specific population, or deep down, I was like, I hope that they see my transparency and my want to grow and help their team will come through, and how I can translate my skills from this population to this population without there being any resistance.
So nice. Thank you, Kirsten, for sharing this. It's so cool to hear how you actually managed to get a position where you clearly didn't have all the skills potentially needed, but you could convince someone, probably by showing how excited you are about what they do, but also by just saying, I'm growth oriented. I love challenges. And, if you need a new set of eyes to look at these things, and I'm your person. And I think this transparency is something that probably resonates with a lot of people when you hire, I can imagine, because it just somehow builds trust. If you're able to say, I'm good at this, maybe I don't know that much about this, but I'm willing to learn. It also shows that you reflected on, this is what I can bring and this is what I have to learn. And I think it's a great attitude to have, because when you hire people, you want to find people with the right attitude too. And I think attitude beats any sort of skills, because you can teach skills, you cannot teach attitudes. Yeah, love that last part very much, Kirsten. And I could keep asking you questions forever and ever, because I think it's just so cool and inspiring to see how someone can actually go out of a PhD and find a position that feels fulfilling. I mean, you didn't say that per se, but I have a feeling you're very happy where you are today. And just step out of a PhD and really find that position when you know what your values are, your non-negotiables, when you have clarity around these things, combined with a little bit of help and proactivity. I do believe this is a great setup for success. And of course, patience, right? Because nothing happens overnight. And I think sometimes it's really about proving that you really want that thing. And it's really when I think about a short little anecdote about me and Alma Me. So in the beginning of 23, when I decided with Angela to jump in full time, I went into Alma Me and I really, really believed in it, that we can make it. It was financially quite challenging, as most of you can imagine. I was 100% a company. So I was completely living off my savings. And for me, this was such a kind of testament to how much I want this, because I went through the struggle of not being financially safe. I went through all of these struggles to be here today. And at the end of the day, you need to believe and you need to keep going and not expect it to happen overnight. I mean, now 1 year later, I'm sitting here. We're actually doing quite well so far. But I could have given up and say I go for a more safe choice that might not be as fulfilling. So I think this is just something that came to mind when you talked about your own transition journey. It's like I feel like you knew where you wanted to go at some point, and then you just did everything to move in that direction. So thank you very much for sharing, Kirsten. It was a very exciting story, a very inspiring story, and I hope many people feel inspired. And I hope for the listeners, you can take something out of this and maybe directly apply it. I think it was quite a lot of actionable advice, a word that Andrew Huberman uses a lot, my favorite podcaster. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode today. And if you like it, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Also, please feel free to connect with Kirsten, follow her on LinkedIn, or connect with her, maybe ask her out for a coffee chat. And I will put the link to her LinkedIn in the show notes. And if you are a PhD who needs a little bit more support, we have a newly launched program where we really support you from I'm a PhD, I don't know where to go until you sign a job offer, and I will drop the link into the show notes too. And thank you so much again, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for taking the time, Kirsten, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.